Power Heal here, and today we're going to be talking about how to heal dungeons as a priest in Classic World of Warcraft. So the idea here is that Dire Maul just came out, people are doing that, they might be leveling alts. Dire Maul is also really good for alt healers, so I thought there'd be a need for this, and also I kind of wanted to put one of these out there. I want this to be like a very comprehensive dungeon healing guide. This is going to be specifically focused on like level 60 content or like kind of end game, so 50 to 60, but it can also be used for lower level dungeon healing as well, and I'll try and make specific points about that when they're relevant. I may do a specific video on dungeon healing, or low level dungeon healing, but for now this is going to be kind of like the one you can use as like a catch-all, and it should pretty much explain things in their entirety. So yeah, let's hop right into it, right? So the first thing that I want to do is talk about the difference in healing dungeons versus healing raids, right? So I would say that the main difference is that you're pretty much the solo healer, right? So you can kind of control where all the healing goes, which means you're going to have a lot less overhealing. You're going to be able to make use of your heal for time spells more effectively because nobody's going to be there to snipe them, right? And also, the damage that comes in dungeons is typically a lot more forgiving than raids. And raids is very spiky, very bursty damage sometimes. Sometimes because you have very hard-hitting mobs, or you have multiple hard-hitting mobs connecting on the same person. And, it's not really the same in dungeons, obviously, because you're only one person, so you couldn't really be expected to heal that type of damage on multiple people or anything like that. The other thing, too, is that there's less like AoE damage, I would say, in dungeons, or less raid damage or party damage, I guess you could say, typically speaking. You still do get party damage, but a large focus of the dungeon is actually just kind of keeping your tank alive. And, on the surface, you hear that and it's like, oh, that's kind of easy, right? Because you have such a crazy toolkit, it should be really easy to keep your tank alive in a dungeon. And for the most part, that's true. But for me, really, the skill expression for dungeoning as a priest and healing dungeons is more about the efficiency of it rather than actually just completing the dungeons. Because completing the dungeons baseline is relatively easy with the priest kit. You just have so many ways to stop the tank from dying, which is the main thing that's going to be the barrier for you to complete the dungeon. But, my goal when running a dungeon is I want to be capped by the DPS. I want our pace to be capped by the DPS. I don't want our pace to be capped by my mana bar. So I want to play as efficiently as possible so that, we can clear as efficiently as possible. And, we just have a very smooth, relatively quick dungeon. We can do more of them, get people the gear they want. And I have a feeling that's probably what a lot of you guys are looking for too. So we're going to explain how to do that. And basically what it comes down to, and what a lot of this video is going to be focused around, is trying to abuse the 5-second rule as much as possible. And we'll talk about the 5-second rule, and we'll talk about why this is kind of a little bit different than what's going on in raids. So the 5-second rule is basically, you can think of it like this. You have a regen that goes on every 2 seconds. When you're just standing around doing nothing, your mana comes back and your health comes back. I believe they're different formulas though. So we're pretty much just talking about mana regen here. And every character has a mana regen formula for when they're just standing around. And they get these ticks of mana back every 2 seconds. Now, when you cast a spell, like something like Flash Heal, and when I say cast, I mean finish the cast, right? You're going to notice something, and I'll point it out with the add-on that I have here. I'll link the add-on in the description so you guys can check it out. This is the add-on I use to help track the 5-second rule stuff. So we cast the spell, and it finishes, okay? And we get this blue bar. This blue bar is 5 seconds, and what it is basically like a penalty. You notice it changes now to this gray bar, okay? We're going to dump our mana a little bit more so you can see have more time. There's more active time on the gray bar. But you notice every time I'm spamming Flash Heal and it's finishing, this blue bar is resetting, which means that every time you finish a cast, you're penalized for 5 seconds, and this resets, as you can see. So I'm just resetting it. And then when we don't cast for 5 seconds, okay, then we go into the gray bar state, and this is where we're actually ticking up our mana. So you'll see our mana goes up a little bit when that tick happens, right? You can see it's perfectly in time with the tick, 2 second ticks. And basically, what we're going to be trying to do in a dungeon is stay in this mode where we're regenerating as much mana as possible. And the reason for that is that obviously, we'll have more mana at our disposal if we do that, right? Like the more we're in this mode where we're constantly casting and we're not getting any regen, then it's kind of hurting our ability to regenerate mana, and we're going to have to forcibly stop and drink to regenerate, right? And obviously you're going to be drinking regardless of whether this bar is active or inactive, but you're going to get even more mana back when you've got the gray bar here as opposed to the blue one. So when you're outside the 5-second rule. So you're looking at the dungeon and basically all the healing you're going to be doing, and it's all through the lens of how can we be not casting for as long as possible. Actually, it seems kind of counterintuitive because especially if you played retail WoW, there's kind of this thing where they say it's like always be casting, right? Where you always want to be casting something. But typically that's because in retail, you're not really limited by your mana as a healer as much anymore. I'm sure to some degree you are. I haven't played in about like 3 expansions, and to be honest, I didn't play healer, I played DPS. But the always be casting thing is more targeted to DPS players because you always want to be doing damage when possible, obviously, right? And they also have basically renewable resources for DPS in retail, which you don't have in Classic. Mana in Classic is a much more limited resource, both for healers and damage dealers. So it sounds counterintuitive, but in dungeons, you really want to be doing nothing more often than not. And that probably sounds a bit boring, but, you can still wand if you want to, because a wand doesn't count as a cast. So, for example, if I were to go wand the Servant here, and I had my mana ticking up, you wouldn't see the blue bar appear, because wanding is just kind of like an auto attack. It's like a ranged auto attack for casters, right? You can think of it like that. So you can kind of do that to mobs in the dungeon if things get too boring for you. But yeah, the idea is you want to be healing as little as possible and maximizing that regen. So how do we do that on a tank specifically, right? Well, the main thing that we're going to do is we're going to let the tank take a little bit of damage, okay? So he's going to get chipped a little bit, maybe like 70%, 60%, something like that, okay? And then that's when we're going to start our heal. And we're going to start with the big heal, okay? So we pretty much want to be using the biggest heal available in most cases. This is why if you're leveling through dungeons, I recommend always having the biggest rank heal trained. It's not something that's completely necessary, so if you don't have the goal to do it, it's not going to sink you in terms of running dungeons. But if you do plan on running dungeons a bit, I would always try and keep I'm going to call this your base heal, and your base heal consists of this whole section of lesser heal 1 to 3, heal 1 to 4, and greater heal 1 to 4. So I'm going to be referring to those as that whole continuum as a base heal, and I'll get into the specifics of why that is a bit later. But that's just how I'm going to be referring to like that whole continuum. It's going to be base heal, okay? And you always want to have like the max rank of your base heal available at all times. So like if you get a new rank of greater heal, you want to train that. If you get a new rank of heal, you want to train that. A new rank of lesser, you want to train that. And the reason for that is because you want your tank to be able to take as much damage as possible, and you want to put back as much healing at one time. And the reason for that is because the more healing you put back at once, then you can kind of just not heal for the next kind of 3-4 seconds, maybe 5 seconds. And the idea is you want to get 5 seconds of not casting, so you at least get a little bit of those mana ticks back, right? So you want to cast a big heal on the tank, okay? When he's at like, 40-ish, or sorry, like 60-ish, 50-ish%, depending on what rank you have. And you kind of doing it so you want to top him off, right? Now, obviously, heals can crit, so sometimes if your heal crits, it's a bit wasted. But typically in dungeons, you're not really going to have that much crit, especially if you're in lower level dungeons. Even in level 60 dungeons, you're just not really going to have that much crit on priests without your world buffs. So you're not really playing around your crit, right? You're just trying to match it up so that the heal that you're casting is the biggest possible, and when you cast it, it's going to bring your tank full or close to full. Now, there are add-ons that can help you with this. I can link them in the description. The one I use is Cell, and it basically has what's called heal prediction. So if I go to cast a heal and I'm casting it on somebody, it shows me what that's going to look like on their health bar. So I can see if I'm like topping them off, if I'm over healing them, if I'm not healing enough. And that's basically how you are going to play these situations where you're going to let him take damage down to, like I said, 60%-ish, and then you cast this big heal, and then it tops him off, and then that gives you more time to drink, right? Because if I'm trying to heal him, at every interval he takes damage. Let's say he's taking 500 damage hits, right? And he takes 2 hits, so I start my heal, I cast it, he took another 2 hits, right? Okay, so I'm starting another heal, and it casts, and I'm just never entering the actual regen, right? I'm just trapped in this penalized regen tier. But if I do a big heal, okay, and then I just let it sit, okay, then maybe now he's starting to get low again, right? I've gotten like a tick or so at least, and I get another tick before it finishes. So I've gotten 2 ticks, then I cast another heal. You guys kind of get the idea. I'm trying to, it sounds like I'm belaboring the point, and I am, but this is like the fundamental aspect of dungeon healing, because you can afford to do this in dungeons, unlike in raids, because the damage just doesn't come in as fast, and you have a lot more control of the situation. Now, something else about this 5-second rule that's very important to note is, like I said, it's when you finish casting, okay? So for a lot of people, the idea of letting the tank get to like 60%, 50%, it's kind of sketchy, especially in something like a hardcore scenario, right? You're thinking, well, surely it's better that you just kind of like, you're just healing them all along. You know, you're healing them incrementally, because even if it's wasting mana, it's at least kind of providing that blanket of mental security that, you know, they're not going to die or people aren't going to be like AFK on them. And that would be a concern if you had to start the heal when they were low. But you don't have to start the heal when they were low, because the 5-second rule only deactivates when the heal finishes, right? So I'll prove this to you. I'll just spam a bunch of heals to waste my mana a bit so we can see. And then what I want you to look at is the blue bar right now, right? So it's constantly refreshing because we're constantly casting. I'm going to cast one to reset it. And then look, I'm casting and canceling, casting and canceling, casting and canceling. You notice it's not resetting, right? And now we're in the actual mana tick, right? Oh, we just did it again. So we're casting, canceling, casting, canceling. Now we're in the actual mana ticks. And I'm casting, canceling. We're still in our regen. Still in our regen. So basically, you can cast and cancel all day long, and you're not interrupting your regen. It's only when you let your heal finish that the regen is interrupted. And that's huge, because what that means is you can be cancel casting on the tank the entire time, like this, right? And you either have a key to cancel your cast, or you can move. And you just wait until you kind of line it up for when he hits that 60%. And the moment he hits like 60%, you can have that heal come in on him and basically heal him to full, right? So it's not like you're starting the heal when he hits 60% or something like that. That would be a bit sketch, right? But this allows you to basically put the healing right back into him the moment he hits that threshold, where the heal is going to be fully beneficial for him and there's not going to be overhealing. So that's like the basic premise of how you want to tank heal in the dungeons, right? In a situation where you have full control over all the healing done. And there's another spell that's really great, and it's just kind of like a supplemental spell that helps you do this even more effectively. And that spell is Renew. So Renew is a heal over time spell. It heals every 3 seconds for 15 seconds, and it doesn't heal on the initial tick, and this is going to be important later. But basically, how I like to do my healing is I'm cancel casting on the tank, right? And then, okay, so he hits 60%. I'm seeing him use 70. He's about to hit 60. So I let the heal go through, and then I cast Renew, okay? And it's very important that you cast the Renew directly after the heal. Why is this the case, right? Well, because, again, if we cast the heal, and then I'm like, oh, yeah, I think I'm going to Renew, right? Now we were about to get a tick, and I just reset the 5-second rule again, because Renew is a cast, even though it's instant, so it resets our penalty, okay? But if we heal the tank, okay, and then I immediately cast a Renew, all right, then what's happening is you notice I'll do it again, right, just so we only reset our cooldown here by like I don't know, half a second or something like that. So we're basically losing nothing when we do that, and then we get the renew on the target. And what the renew is going to do is the renew is basically prolonging the time it takes for you to have to heal the target again, right? Because it's healing the target gradually over time. And the best part is let's say we top the tank with our normal heal and then we cast the renew, right? Because the renew doesn't tick right away, you see it's not ticking right away. It's already on me. It just ticks now, 3 seconds in. That means that even the first tick of renew isn't going to be wasted when the character's at full health. Like within the time that it takes for the first tick to happen, the tank is absolutely going to have taken a bit of damage by then. Okay? Which means that none of the ticks get wasted. And this is what makes the spell so powerful in dungeons, right? Is the fact that you can use all of the available ticks. Okay? And you have complete control. And it's just a fantastic spell to pair with your heal on the tank, and it just prolongs the amount of time it takes for you to have to cast another heal by quite a bit, and it allows you to sit in the regen for even longer. Okay, now a couple things on renew in general. Okay, so renew has, and this is where we're going to be getting into spell coefficients. It has a spell coefficient of basically 100%. What that means is that all of your plus healing that you have is going to go into your renew. Okay, so if you have 500 plus healing, it's all going to go into renew. So this becomes, essentially, if you round this up to 900, this becomes 1400 plus healing. Okay, or 1400 healing on that renew, which is really, really strong. And the one thing is that when you're a lower level healer, okay, you don't quite benefit from renew to the same degree as you do in your higher level, because you don't really start getting plus healing until around like level 50. You can get plus healing, you can get like of healing gear, but then you're really sacrificing a lot of the other stats that are important for you in a dungeon. So you don't really start getting gear that has good stats plus healing on it until like level 50, level 60 you get your prebis, which means that as you're leveling up, renew is not going to be as strong as it is at level 60. However, the trick we did there on the tank is still very relevant, right? Like that kind of still works at any level. But I just want to make you aware that renew itself is not like a super mana efficient spell. And what do I mean by that? Well, I mean in terms of if we want to heal somebody and we're looking at mana spent per point of healing, especially when you're sub 60 and you have no plus healing, your default normal healing spells here are absolutely going to be better, like point for point wise. Like the point for every point of mana, they're going to heal more than renew. The downside of them is that obviously they have a cast time, right? So it's going to take longer to cast and stuff like that, and they're not instant, but they are going to be more mana efficient. Okay, and that's going to be true even at 60 for the most part, I would think, until like really high levels of plus healing value. And the reason for that is because your bread and butter heal spells, this heal continuum of the lesser heals, the heals, and the greater heals, they all have a spell coefficient of like 0.84. So it's not, or 84%. So it's not 100 like renew is, but it's pretty close. Okay, and keep in mind they have a better base efficiency. So it would take a lot of plus healing for renew to outpace those in terms of like the overall efficiency of the spell. So just that's something to keep in mind, that it's when you're casting this renew spell, it's not that it's more efficient spell for spell. It's the fact that you're not going to have to heal the tank, right? Because it's ticking on them, and it's going to give you more time to sit in the in your regen state. That is what's going to make it more efficient. So it's not the actual spell itself, but it's kind of like the game mechanics and how that's allowing you to play, and that's what's making you more efficient. So I just want to make that clear, because obviously we kind of talked up renew a bit here, and I don't want lower level players to think like I should just be casting renew on everything, right? That's not really how it works. We're using it mostly specifically on the tank to basically extend the time that we get to sit in the regen state before we have to heal him again. And, it's not to say that's the only case for Renew, right? A lot of times you'll kind of cast a Renew if, you want to heal somebody, but it's not critical that they get healed at the time, but there's maybe somebody else that is critical. So think of a situation like this where you got a tank taking damage, you have a mage that took damage, okay? And the mage took damage, but he no longer has aggro, okay? And then you have a rogue that is also taking damage from another mob. So the reason why Renew can be good to use in a situation like this is because in this situation, we don't really care about the mana efficiency. The problem is we have to heal 3 people at once, okay? And it's difficult to do that with you could use something like Prayer of Healing, but now you're wasting a ton of the mana efficiency there, right? Because there's 2 targets that don't need any healing. So what's going to happen is you're going to be healing the tank, right? But now the rogue needs heals as well, and the mage is a little bit chunked out. And you don't want the mage to stay chunked out because even though he doesn't have threat right now, if he does reacquire threat at some point, obviously it's not good for him to be at 75% or whatever. So this is a perfect scenario where you would cast a Renew on the mage because it's instant, right? And it doesn't, it's not like you're really giving much up to cast the Renew on the mage. And you're alternating heals between the rogue and the warrior. And that's kind of the idea, is that that's better than having to rotate heals between all 3, because if it's 2.5 seconds to cast a normal heal, right? So if I'm having to cast a heal on the warrior, then the rogue, then the mage, right? There's kind of more of a delay there when I can just cast the Renew on the mage and then cast a heal on the warrior, then cast a heal on the rogue, right? So Renew is going to be used in the tank primarily, and then it's going to be used to heal a non-critical target up to full, like while you need to be doing other healing on targets that are taking damage. And the reason why I mention that specifically is because if somebody just gets chunked out normally, in most cases it's better to just hard cast a heal on them because it's more efficient. You know what I mean? So in other words, if your mage took damage, he's at 75% health, right? And you're basically the threat is gone on him, and you're just healing a warrior now, right? There's no reason to cast a Renew on that mage when you could just cast a heal on the warrior, then cast a heal on the mage right after. You don't have to cast a Renew there. It's just less mana efficient than casting a heal. And the same idea applies, though, where if you have targets that are chunked out in a party and they no longer have threat on them, but you want to heal them, right, anyway, so that if they do get threat in the future, they're not at like half health or something, you want that heal to happen immediately after the first heal. So you would basically heal the warrior, right, and then you would immediately heal the mage because you want to re-trigger this penalty as soon as possible, right? That way you start getting back into your normal ticks as quickly as possible as well. So I think that kind of like all makes sense, and that's basically how you would use heal and how you use Renew. So with those kind of being talked about, I want to talk about the ranks we use for them, and this is where we're going to get into what I call the heal continuum. So for the ranks on Renew, I typically use the max rank Renew. I like to have this on my bar, and then I'll have one that's rank 5 or rank 6, either one of these two. And the idea is that this is what I'm going to use on the tank, basically, right? Or I'm going to use this in that situation where there's multiple targets taking damage. There's somebody that has taken damage and isn't under threat right now, and I know that this will bring them to full health. But I also have the lower ranks on the bar in the event that either I don't have the mana to cast the higher rank, or I think that the higher rank would overheal somebody that I'm trying to heal passively, right? So that's why it's always good to have at least like one other rank below the max rank, so that you can kind of adjust the healing value as needed there. Now, when people talk about spell ranks, and this is probably a good time to go into this, they often ask the question, what is the most efficient rank for a given type of heal, right? And I understand why this question gets asked, because a lot of times we're looking at things from a pure efficiency standpoint nowadays, right? You want to do everything as efficiently you can as a DPS, so you're thinking, I want to be using my heals as efficiently as I can as a healer. And it's very logical, right? So I don't fault anyone for asking the question. But a lot of times when you're asking this question, it's sort of like the wrong question to be asking. And we'll get to that in a second, but I will tell you what the most efficient rank for every heal is. And the most efficient rank for every heal is basically any heal that's at rank, whatever rank is closest to 20 or at 20 for that heal is going to be its most mana efficient rank once you start getting a decent amount of plus healing. And why is that the case? Well, because basically any heal that is below rank 20 has its spell coefficient completely butchered. So you know how we said this renew has a spell coefficient of 100% of like 1.0? Well, if you have a heal that's like, or a renew that's rank level 15, then that renew would have probably like a 30% spell coefficient. I'm not exactly sure what the value is, but basically every spell loses a ton of value on the coefficient side of things when it's under level 20. And the reason for that is because how damage kind of works in this game, in the end game, is that you don't really need like a ton, like you don't really need to be doing a ton more healing to heal Nax in terms of raw throughput than you do to heal MC. Like the damage doesn't scale up that much, and even in the sense where the damage does scale up, you have to realize the mitigation is scaling up as well. So warriors get more armor as they get better gear. Druids get more armor, they get more dodge, parry, right? So all these like mitigation things factor in. So the basic idea is that you can use a spell like rank 4 heal in Molten Core, and you can kind of use it in Nax. And it's not like you need to use all of a sudden your highest rank heals all the time in Nax. You know what I mean? And you could use lower rank heals in Molten Core. That's just not really how the game tends to scale. And because of that, what would happen if they didn't butcher the spell coefficients on really low level spells is you could use like a rank 1 renew, okay? And if you have 800 plus healing, then this 27 mana renew in the late game, or this renew would be, let's say you have 800 plus healing, right? So you have 849 healing on this renew if the coefficient didn't get butchered, and it only costs 27 mana. So that would mean in the late game, you're using a level 1 renew that costs 27 mana, and it would be healing the same amount, essentially, as a max rank renew in the early game when you had no plus healing for 328 mana. So almost like 10 times the mana, basically, right? So that's just like absolutely a staggering difference, right? Like you would basically never go if they didn't butcher the coefficients of the low level spells, which means that basically the lower the level the spell is, the more efficient it is, assuming it's not below level 20, because that's where the penalty kicks in. So the answer to that question of what is the most efficient spell rank for every type of spell is just very simply whatever rank is closest to 20 or at 20, or just above 20 or at 20. That's going to be the most efficient. But that question is not really the same as which spell ranks should you use, right? Because it's not always about the actual just mana efficiency point blank. Because on something like Renew, or any heal really, the heal has to be doing enough where it's going to matter in a scenario, right? So if your heal is not really doing relevant healing, if it can't keep pace with the damage that's coming in, then it's basically worthless to use as a spell. And if it's really weak healing-wise, then what happens is, in order to get the same effect as a high-rank spell, you have to cast more of it. And the moment you have to start overcasting low-rank, quote-unquote, more efficient heals to equal the effect of casting one bigger rank heal, right? Now, you're kind of completely defeating the purpose, because if you have to cast more heals, what's happening is you're now going into this mana restriction state where you're in the mana penalty more often. So you're gaining efficiency technically by using the lower rank of the spell, but you're losing efficiency by cutting off access to your regen for a higher percentage of the time. So it doesn't actually turn out to be more efficient in the long run, right? Which is why, again, when we're healing tanks and stuff like that, we're trying to use max rank heals in our dungeons, and then we're using max rank renew on the tank as well, right? Because we know we can get full value out of these max ranks, and they're going to allow us to stay in the regen state longer. So that's kind of a thing on spell ranks for renew, and just talking about how ranks works and the efficiency in general. And now we're going to move over to what I call the heal continuum, and we'll tell you which ranks of heal to use. So just to reiterate there, I use max rank renew and rank 5. These are not set in stone. You can mess around with rank 4, rank 6, see which one you kind of like better. It's not like, because I'm telling you what I use, you don't have to use that. It's not, I may change this in the future as I get more plus healing, as I do different types of content. Sometimes I switch it out. So it's just kind of something that you have to adapt it to the situation, right? So moving on to the heal continuum. What do I mean by heal continuum? So basically what I mean is that all these normal heal spells, which is what I call them, right? Remember the default heal? Like, it's lesser heal rank 1 to 3, heal rank 1 to 4, and then I include greater heal rank 1 to 4 in this like normal, I call them all basically heal in my opinion. And why is that? Because if you notice, if you look at these, right, they all just get continually more healing on them, okay? They all have the same cast speed, right? So they're basically, like, you could just go from heal rank 4, you could call this heal rank 5, you could call this heal rank 6, heal rank 7, rank 8, you know what I mean? You could just do it like that. They just decided to call it greater heal, but in reality, there's really no difference between these spells. They have the same coefficient, and the reason why they have the same coefficient is because spell coefficient is based on the type of heal it is, so single target or AoE, and then the cast time. So what that means is, since these all have the same cast time, and they're all single target heals, they all have the same spell coefficient, they are basically all the same heal. Now, the one exception here is kind of like the lower rank heals are a little weird. This is a 1.5 second cast, and then it goes to 2 seconds, and then it goes to 2.5 seconds. That's only present on the lesser heals, and those are all under level 20, so you're not going to be using those in the late game anyway. As soon as you get to like the actual relevant heals, they're all 2.5 second casts, and keep in mind that is with the talent here, right? Otherwise, they are 3 second casts. So basically, I think how they were going at it from a design perspective is 1.5 second for your first heal, 2 seconds for your second heal, 2.5 for your third heal, and then you go into 3 second heals, but you can bring those back down to 3 second or 2.5 seconds with the talents. So yeah, basically, there's no distinction between any of these, in my opinion. They're basically all just the same spell, and you can think of, using even something like heal rank 4 as your down ranking from greater heal or something. So that being said, which heals do I use from this heal continuum, right? Well, I think heal rank 2 is the level 21, it's the min one, but I find that typically, unless you're in uber late game, with like really high plus healing values, it's just almost not worth it to use this in most cases because it doesn't put back enough healing even in the most minimal sense. If you find it's different for you and your experience, depending on what type of content you're healing, you can obviously try and use something like this, but for me, I just use rank 4 heal as my kind of bread and butter heal. This heals like about 1,000, 1,100-ish, right, in my current plus healing, and that's pretty solid. Keep in mind, this is without Benediction, which I should have. We've just gotten incredibly unlucky. So if I had Benediction instead of this fishing rod, we would have 150 extra healing, and about 85% of that would get passed on to the heal. So this would be around like a 1,200 heal, 1,200-ish and something. And that's good enough to heal most people. Like if somebody just takes like some chip damage, this will pretty much heal them to full in a relatively mana efficient way with little overhealing. Okay. In a raid, in a dungeon environment, like technically speaking, you might be able to afford to downrank this a little bit to like a rank 3, only because in a dungeon environment, people are not raid buffs, they might not have quite as much HP, but still, I just basically use heal rank 4, and I think that's more than suitable and more than gets the job done. And then I basically use 2 ranks of the greater heal. So I use the max rank greater heal, and that's for tank healing and stuff like that when I want the big heal or to pair with something like inner focus. And then I use rank 2 greater heal. Now, basically how this works in my mind is that when I get better gear, I'm going to swap rank 1 greater heal in place of rank 2 greater heal. But currently, since my plus healing isn't super strong, I just want a little bit of extra base healing from the spell. And the reason why we have this intermediary spell between our rank 4 heal here and then our max rank greater heal is just to kind of cover a bit more bases, right? I mentioned how in a dungeon, when you're going to be spot healing people, it's not like in a raid where you spot with flash heal, because there's no point in spotting with flash heal because you don't need to heal them that quickly in most cases, right? So you're going to be spotting and spotting just means like reactively healing a target, essentially. So if a rogue just takes a random hit from a mob and it goes back on the tank, I'm going to spot heal them with rank 4 heal, right? But I like having rank 2 greater heal on the bar just in case they need a bit more healing, right? So if they got hit for a bit more than I anticipated, I would use the rank 2 greater heal there. And then obviously if they got really wounded, I would use the rank 4 greater heal. But you're not often spotting random DPS with rank 4 greater heal, because usually when somebody just takes a little bit of damage in a party, using like a heal that is going to heal like 2.3k plus is a bit too much on them, right? So we're usually using rank 4 heal in dungeons to spot heal random DPS. We're using rank 4 heal on the tank, right? And then sometimes we'll spot random DPS with like greater heal rank 2 or something like that. Okay, so that's basically how the greater heals work, how Renew works, and now we're going to talk about Prayer of Healing a bit. So Prayer of Healing, we have 4 ranks, and typically how I have it right now is it's very similar to the greater heal situation, honestly. I have rank 2 on my bar, and I have rank 4. Primarily, I'm almost exclusively using rank 4, just like how I'm almost exclusively either using heal rank 4 or greater heal rank 4. But I have the rank 2 Prayer of Healing, just like I have the rank 2 greater heal on the bar, just in case for those kind of like niche scenarios. So if you're somebody that struggles with keybinds, you don't feel like you have enough binds already or something like that, you can kind of drop probably the rank 2 greater heal and the rank 2 Prayer of Healing, because they're very, very situational. And the reason for that is because these low-level Prayer of Healings here, when you don't have much healing, you can see that they just, they don't really heal that much, right? And usually when you're going to be using a spell like Prayer of Healing, from the group took chunk damage, it's going to be at least around 700 to like 1k, 1.5k chunk damage. So you're pretty much always safe using max rank Prayer of Healing. And obviously, if you're going to use Prayer of Healing with Inner Focus, you might as well just use the max rank because it's free anyway. So even if you do a bit of overhealing, it doesn't matter, right? And this is obviously a really strong dungeon combination. Inner Focus with rank 4 heal, or rank 4 Prayer of Healing, right? And there's kind of one more reason why I typically like to use rank 4 Prayer Healing. And that's because in situations where your whole group is taking damage, right? Oftentimes, what'll happen is there'll be some ability that goes off, kind of like the ghosts in DM West, where they'll do like an AoE, and it hits the group, and it's not constant, right? So another one's probably going to go off at some point, so you do need to heal these group members, but it's not going to go off right away. But what is still happening in these scenarios is the tank is still taking damage, and the tank also probably took damage from the AoE spell. So you kind of run into this issue where if you go to cast a Prayer of Healing, you can sometimes fall behind on the tank, right? Because the tank took the same damage as everybody else, but he's still taking damage while you're casting the prayer, right? And the prayer is only going to heal him for 1,000, single target, right? Because it's healing the other group members for 1,000 as well. The value is in the AoE. So you're basically sacrificing single target healing on the tank to heal the group. And you are gaining a lot by doing that, in the sense that now you don't have to rotate heals on every member of the group, which is also taking away healing time from the tank, and it's keeping you in the 5-second penalty for longer, right, if you have to keep spamming normal heals in the whole group. So it is good to use spells like Prayer Healing in these situations where you get value on them and the whole group is damaged. However, if you use one that's too low rank, right, the problem of falling behind in the tank is exacerbated, right? Because if you use rank 1, like let's say the group takes like 500 damage. Okay, everybody's out like 500, 600 health. And maybe your instinct is like, well, I'm going to use a rank 1 Prayer of Healing here, right? Or a rank 2, because the idea is like, I'm going to basically almost heal all those guys to full, so I don't really have to worry about them that much. And it'll heal the tank a little bit as well, and maybe it crits, you know? And if it crits, then we didn't waste any mana, because we're already a little bit below their health values anyway. The problem is, though, is now the tank is also only getting hit by a 400 healing heal. Whereas if you just used max rank Prayer of Healing, he's getting hit by basically like a 1k. Well, that's a crit, but, you know, he gets hit by like a 1k heal, right? And the 1k heal is going to put you way more ahead. You're going to be less behind than if you use something like a rank 1 or rank 2 Prayer Healing on the tank I'm talking about, right? So when you have to go to heal the tank afterwards, you actually now may have to spend more mana compensating for the fact that you're behind. You may actually have to flash heal, and you might be close to dying now in some circumstances. So now you're using a less efficient heal to bail you out of the situation that you put yourself in because you didn't use like a higher rank Prayer of Healing. So that's one thing you have to be cautious with in terms of using a lower rank Prayer of Healings when you don't have a lot of healing, is that the effect is very minimal, and you know, you do lose a lot of time on the tank, because again, this takes 3 seconds to cast, right? And you could cast 2 flash heals in that time, keep in mind, right? They basically heal the same amount or more, right, for a max rank flash. So that's a crit, but yeah, so it basically heals the same. You could heal double the amount in the time it takes you to cast this on the tank. So just something to be aware of there. But this is obviously a very useful spell, and it's highly useful when paired with Inner Focus. Now, Flash Heal. So this is kind of like the final main core spell outside of Shield, obviously, that you're going to be using in dungeons. And in dungeons, I pretty much almost exclusively use rank 7 Flash Heal, because you're pretty much just using this if there's an emergency. You're not using this really to top people up like you are in a raid, because you know, the time is not of the essence if you're just topping somebody up in a dungeon, and you can just do that with a much more efficient rank heal, basically like a rank 2 heal or a rank 4 heal like you see here. So yeah, you're pretty much always using Flash Heal max rank, and you're using it to bail you out of bad situations, basically, because there's going to be some situations where you just don't have the time to cast a full rank heal, where you have to be alternating through multiple targets. And if you're trying to alternate your max rank heal through multiple targets, right, it's just going to every second, like every time you do a new cast, you're taking an extra second if you're trying to use like a normal heal on the normal heal continuum as opposed to a flash heal. So you're saving a second for every heal you're casting for every flash heal. Now, there may be some situations where you do want to rotate through targets using, like if 3 targets are kind of taking alternating damage, right, where the rogue takes damage first, then the warrior, then the second warrior, something like that, right? And nobody else in the group is taking damage, you can't really use prayer healing. It may be a case where you just want to alternate greater heals on them, right? So it's like, okay, like this guy, he's the lowest, he's getting greater heal, then we go to second lowest, then we go to third lowest, and then we just keep repeating, right, until people are healed up and the pull is done. And in those cases, it's kind of nice to do that, because since you're using a high rank heal, when you come back to the first person, they're not critically low, right? But the difference is in terms of like when you would do a rotation of flash heals on 3 people versus a rotation of greater heals is just how quickly you think they're going to die. Because it's pretty much always going to be better to rotate greater heals on targets, even if multiple targets are taking damage at the same time, as long as you think those greater heals will reach them in time and they'll survive, right? Because you are getting more value from the greater heals, right? But you're pretty much using flash heal in a case where you're uncertain if they'll survive the duration of the greater heal, right? So there may be a case where it's like the same 3 targets are taking damage, but they're just taking a lot more burst damage, right? And the idea is that the mobs are going to die quickly, but you can't let your group members die before the mobs die. So that's where you kind of just would alternate spamming max rank flash on all these, right? So yeah, that's basically the situations you'd use flash heal in a dungeon scenario. And for the abolish disease stuff, so these 2 are the same spell, except they cost the same amount of mana. And this one stays on the target and keeps removing diseases. So once you get Abolish Disease, you always use Abolish Disease. It even ticks immediately, I believe. So it's just unequivocally better than Cure Disease. Not even a debate there. And that's pretty much all the holy spells. Right, yeah. So, Dispel Magic is like the same thing here, right? Once you get rank 2, it's just unequivocally better than rank 1. There's no point in even going back to rank 1 again. So just completely take that off your bar. And then the only other thing to talk about in terms of like active heal cast is shield. And in dungeons, it's very similar to raid. You are always going to be using max rank power word shield. You could create scenarios in your head where it might be like slightly more efficient to use lower rank shields, but realistically speaking, what those scenarios would have to account for is that you'd have to be sure that you couldn't use the remaining value of the shield at any point. And that's probably unlikely because when you put this on, it lasts 30 seconds. So in other words, even if you shield somebody, right, to take damage and it's an overcompensation, like let's say you shield somebody and they only take 500 damage from a mob that's going to hit them, right? They still have this shield on for like 20 some more seconds. So it's likely it's still going to find other value. So, and typically you don't just shield people for taking like, if they're going to take 500 damage anyway, you would just heal that back normally, right? So you're pretty much using this in like a clutch scenario to save people. And in those scenarios, you obviously want it to be as strong as possible. So I just use max rank 10. And that's basically how you should be using shield in a dungeon, is just to save people, or in some cases, like before certain difficult pulls or something, you can kind of pre-shield people, right? So you can kind of do the same thing that I was talking about in the raiding video, where you're casting a shield on your party member, you're sitting down to drink, re-maxing, casting another shield once the cooldown comes up, and you basically shield the whole party, and you can go into a pull like that, and you basically still go into the pull at 100% mana, because you're drinking in between every shield cooldown that you're putting on people, right? And you can kind of do the same thing with Renew. Shield tends to be more effective because it's just preventative damage, but if you're going to pre-shield a tank before a pull, or do any type of pre-healing to a tank before a pull, typically it's better that you renew them rather than shield them, so they can get the rage before, like as they're going into the pull, right? The only time I would pre-shield a tank in a 5-man is if there was like some insane pull they were going into where I knew they were going to be getting hit by like all the mobs at once, right? So it's very rare that I'll pre-shield a tank in a 5-man. It's much more common in a raid because spike damage is much more common. So if you have a tank going into tank Garads, right, really good place to pre-shield them. Really good place would be Golemag and his ads, right, if the tank gets hit by all 3 of them. But in a 5-man, typically I'm not pre-shielding before a pull at all, because it kind of just like hurts the tank's rage generation and their ability to get a threat on the pack, right? And other than that, I think I want to just talk about Fade here. So Fade is like a super underrated spell. I'll talk a little about Fear as well. Basically, this kind of, it's not really like a Vanish in that it doesn't take you out of combat or anything, but it just drops threat. It's kind of like a Rogue Feint, right? And it's very strong because how I look at healing aggro, right, is that a lot of cases of healing aggro tend to happen at the start of a pull because mobs don't have a lot of other threat on them. So like the tank hasn't had time to really, or the DPS to build up a substantial amount of threat in them yet. And your heal does a big burst when it kind of comes in of threat. But then, since you're not going to be spamming big rank heals on somebody, the idea is it's more just burst than anything else, right? So you're not putting out a sustained high amount of threat as a healer, which is why you don't see healers really having to worry about threat on like bosses, like actual boss fights and stuff, you know? They just don't put out anywhere near the same threat compared to a DPS, but they can put out high amounts of burst threat right at the start. So Fade is like the perfect answer and counter to that because it just is like the antithesis of it, right? It's like a threat drop. So once you do that big heal at the start, if you do get threat, you can Fade, and 9 times out of 10, you drop aggro, or you at least make it very easy for whoever else is in the party to kind of pick up aggro, right? So Fade is a super useful spell, and you just always want to have that in your toolkit. Fear can be incredibly useful as well. Obviously, this one is very self-explanatory in my opinion. You can use this when your group is running away, when you're retreating. If you're in an open area, right, where you're not going to be at risk for pulling multiple mobs, you can just use this, like on a situation when things kind of get sketchy, if things are getting overwhelmed, you can use this on yourself, right, if things are attacking you and nobody's going to take them off. One thing I will say with this is like, you're kind of afraid to use it near other packs of mobs or indoors, right? But if you're about to die, you have to press this button, right? Because it's better to have the chance to pull other mobs and you be alive than you being dead in 90% of cases in dungeons, right? So you should this button should always have gone off before you die to like aggro, pretty much. Obviously, some things are immune to it or whatever. But this and Fade should pretty much always be used before you're going to die, no matter what. Another thing you can do with this is, this is kind of like a bit more of a niche situation, but sometimes the tank is like, and maybe an overpull happens, right? And the tank is taking too many mobs, and he's just taking too much damage. Like, you're behind on him, you're keeping him up just barely, right? But you know that, like, you're not going to continue to be able to keep him up. You can kind of just walk up for a brief second and fear some mobs off of him, relieve the pressure a bit, help you catch back up on him, whether that be a tank, another damage dealer, something like that, right? So fear is very useful in those situations, and it's kind of like a core part of your dungeon kit, you know what I mean? So yeah, that's basically everything here. I think something I don't have trained here, which I should have trained, I don't know why, is Mind Soothe. This can be particularly strong when you're like retreating to prevent mobs that would otherwise pull from pulling into you, right? Obviously, it just has general use cases in allowing you to skip some mobs, or maybe preventing, like reducing their aggro range. So if people are fighting near other mobs, right, and you're afraid they're going to pull a pack, you could Mind Soothe the mobs there. The problem is that you have to be careful mind soothing things when you're already in combat with other things, unless it's like a last resort. So for example, if you're running out of a dungeon and you know you're about to aggro this pack, if you don't mind soothe it, then obviously you just mind soothe it. But you have to be careful about pre-mind soothing things when you're already in a pull to prevent people from pulling them, because if the mind soothe resists, then that thing will pull, and if there's a pack there, it'll pull the entire pack, right? So just something to note about Mind Soothe. And that is pretty much all the basics of what you're trying to be doing in dungeons, how all the heals work, the ranks of things I use. And now we're just going to take a little bit of time to talk about when things hit the fan, when everything's collapsing, and some things that you can do to help improve your chances of survival. So this kind of applies to hardcore, it applies to softcore. The idea is to just help you be a better healer overall in those sketchy situations. And obviously, this is going to be a bit of a generalist take because, obviously I'd have to be able to see a given situation play out to tell you exactly how to react to it. So this isn't going to be what that's going to be for. It's mainly about giving you kind of overarching guiding principles. And the idea is that if you kind of understand these and understand why they tend to be things you want to do and things you want to practice, when you get into the sketchy situations, then it's going to be easier for you to deal with them. And it's kind of, you're going to have an idea of like what you want to do. And basically, I would say the first principle and the most important one is you have to have a perspective in mind of like who is most important in your group. And the most important in your group, person in your group as a healer is basically you. Because once you die, nobody else is getting heals. Okay? Now, there may be like certain situations in hardcore where you could potentially, like you dying might actually save multiple other people, right? If there's like a certain situation where they're close to being able to run out and, they would have all gotten killed by this mob, but you run up and fear it or get threat or something. There could be like niche cases like that, but generally speaking, your life is the most valuable life of anybody in the party, even over the tanks, because other classes, even if they're not good at tanks, like good tanks, quote unquote, they can kind of pick up the mantle of tanking, right? Temporarily, at least, or in an emergency. You don't ever want to be the tank typically because casting pushback and all that, and we'll talk about that at the very end of the video. But generally speaking, other classes can at least manage in that role temporarily, where, if you don't have a healer, people are just going to bleed out and die. So your number one priority. Tank is number two priority because he has the most mitigation, he has the most tools, he has cooldowns to keep himself alive, he has ways to get things off the really squishy members of your party, right? He has ways to corral the mobs in general, just so that the pull becomes more organized, less chaotic. So the tank is number two in importance. And then the DPS, it really depends on what DPS you have in your run. But I would say that mages tend to be the next most important. The reasons why is because they have hard crowd control like Polymorph. They have softer crowd control like Roots and Slows. Then they also have AoE damage. And in a game like a Retail, the healer and tank, I feel like, can almost carry quite a few pulls in a lot of dungeons. So even if you have a DPS die, it's not always the end of the world. In Classic, it's a little bit different because resources are so scarce, and things like your mana pool are actually a concern in this version of the game. What happens is, like, if you don't have the damage to kill mobs and you overpull something, you will just wipe to the fact that there's just too much damage going out. For example, or you just go rather. So like I've had numerous pulls in like a Skolo, for example, where we do a really bad overpull and we kind of have the situation under control, and I am like, really keeping this group completely alive, right? But at some point, I'm just gonna go if we don't have the damage to actually kill the stuff, right? So it is important to keep your DPS alive in Classic, and mages tend to be a fantastic DPS at killing things, especially if you need any sort of AoE, right? They're one of the only classes that can kind of like do really efficient AoE damage on 3, 4, or 5 plus targets. Warriors are really great if it's only like 2 or 3 big targets up, right? Because they have cleave and stuff like that. But if you're talking about like a large volume of targets, mage is kind of like an essential thing to keep alive. Now the one caveat is that a mage is only useful if they have mana. So if your mage doesn't have mana and has no way to recover that mana, they go to the bottom of the priority pool. Not necessarily to the bottom, but they drop a lot on the priority pool in terms of them being a damage threat, right? They'll still be able to crowd control and stuff like that using rank 1 Nova, rank 1 Blizzard, if they have it, things like that. But their actual ability to do damage drops off a cliff if they no longer have access to mana. So just something to kind of keep in mind there. Warlocks can be another class that's like can be pretty strong, right? Because they have a lot of, especially if they're able to use their fears safely in a dungeon setting, it's good to keep them alive. Then warriors, I would say, like warrior DPS are probably like third in line, or maybe like second in line after mage, because they're kind of typically close to being as durable as tanks. They can sort of like off tank mobs. They can get threat on other mobs relatively easily. They have cleave, which is like renewable AoE damage, where it's not dependent on mana. So all those types of classes are kind of the classes you want to be thinking about keeping alive in terms of damage dealers after you've kept yourself alive and after you've kept the tank alive, right? Because again, it really is important to keep DPS alive and keep the right ones alive, because if you don't, sometimes you'll just run out of mana, right? Because you won't be able to actually kill things. Now, in terms of just kind of generally reacting to how things go bad, I like to look at it like this, okay? What you should be trying to do whenever a situation goes wrong is, remember, keep yourself alive, keep the tank alive, keep the most important DPS alive, right? That's the first thing. And then in terms of how you're going to be doing that, think about how to do those things in the next 5 seconds, okay? Don't get caught up in thinking on a like too far in the macro sense, because if you're too wrapped up in like, oh, I have to conserve every bit of mana here, right? People may just die in the short term. And like I said, it may be worth it to blow a lot of mana in the short term to keep somebody alive. In hardcore, absolutely. But even in softcore, you may want to blow mana in the short term to keep somebody alive in the event that, now you have their damage for the rest of the pull. Whereas if they died, their damage goes away. Or now you have their CC for the rest of the pull. Now you have their crowd control, their slows, their roots, whatever, right? So the more people you let die, the harder the pull becomes, okay? So you're trying to basically just think like, okay, in the next 5 seconds, how can I ensure I stay alive, the tank stays alive, and the most valuable damage player stays alive? And you're just repeating that in your head in 5-second intervals, okay? That's the main thing. And most likely it's going to involve a lot of use of flash heal and a lot of use of shields, okay? But that's what you have to stay focused on. And the other thing you have to pay attention to, and this is why having an add-on like Cell, and I'll do a video on Cell to kind of break down all the settings, is really good, is you want to pay attention to who has aggro, okay? And who needs certain heals. Because a lot of times in these like sketchy situations, aggro is going to be kind of bouncing all over the place. And like a mage could take 40% of their life, right? But if you can see, and this is another thing too, is like when you're in a dungeon, it's a lot easier to physically see what's going on in front of you. So not only can you see from the raid frames who the aggro is like swapping or leaving to, right? You can also sometimes just see it in the party scenario, where it's a lot harder to see that type of stuff in a raid. So you want to be like, aware and looking at your surroundings, obviously. And if you notice that like, okay, this mage got chunked to 40%, but he no longer has threat, right? You may want to prioritize your heals elsewhere, okay? Even though he seems like he's kind of critically low and he could get one tapped if somebody else hit him, he might actually be pretty safe for a bit, right? And you want to put your heals on the warrior, especially if you have a limited amount of mana. This type of play is super important. So it's not just about, healing the lowest person, right? It's about healing the person that's in jeopardy of dying. And that can change very quickly, and you have to be able to adapt to that. Otherwise, you're going to waste a lot of mana, right? And it's going to make it a lot harder to get through these pulls alive, basically, right? And another thing that can kind of come into play is this Prayer of Healing spell, right? Obviously, you look at this, you think, okay, everything's going to shit. Tons of people are taking damage. This is a fantastic spell to cast. It can be, especially if you have Inner Focus, right? Because it's basically free. So free massive heal for your entire party that hopefully now crits. So this can be a really powerful bailout tool, the Inner Focus Prayer of Healing, or just Prayer of Healing in itself. But you have to be very careful about the situation you cast in, especially depending on your mana. Because if you have low mana, okay, and your entire group is pretty wounded enough where you get value out of it, but they don't actually have active threat on mobs anymore, and most of the mobs are now consolidated by the tank, or maybe one of the warriors and a second warrior has some mobs, you want to think twice about using that heal, because you might just need to save every last bit of mana you have to keep those tanks up. Again, like the moment aggro drops off of these DPS players and really gets kind of consolidated and solidified under the tank, that's the moment where you really need to think, okay, do I need to actually heal the rest of these people up now? Or do I have the mana to do that? Do I have the globals to do that? In other words, if I do that, will the tank die? Right? If there's too many mobs in the tank now? Or do I just need to pour everything I have into this tank to make sure to keep him up, and we'll slowly grind down the other mobs? Okay? Because that's a very common thing, I feel like, that happens. And people just will use their mana very frivolously. Like, they're thinking in their mind, like, I'm getting good value out of Prayer of Healing here, because I'm healing everybody, right? But it's like, you're technically getting good HPS value, but you're not getting, like, the right healing on the right person at the right time when you need it, and you're wasting so much mana that you're not going to be able to continue to do that into the future. So you really, really have to get very picky with your globals, and you have to be thinking, like, who's going to die in the next 5 seconds if I don't heal them? And that's the person you're going to need to be focusing on. Okay? Another similar thing is dispels. So in a game like a retail, I feel like a lot of the dispels, the dispel debuffs in that game are quite nasty. In this game, there's very high variance. Like, there's some things that do very little. There's some things that are terrible. There's some things that only affect certain classes, right? And there's some things that, like, can be situationally really bad or almost irrelevant. A great example of this is, like, I was doing, I think in actually the Scarlet Monastery video I have, the Cathedral one, where I teaching people how to do the spell cleave. One of the first pulls we do in there kind of goes south, and I'm having to spam a bunch of flash heals to keep these people up, and then basically the mages are like rooting people, right? And I didn't have very much mana towards the end of the pull, and you see that I'm not really dispelling a lot of the slows or the roots that are going on some of these people. And that's because in those types of situations, if the root is critical, like for example, if somebody's getting beat on by 3 mobs and they need to be able to move, right? Then you want to dispel that root. Then you want to dispel that slow. But, you don't really want to dispel the slow on the tank necessarily if he doesn't need to get somewhere to pick up a mob, if he already has the mobs. You don't want to dispel a root on somebody who's not in any danger, right? It's just extra mana, waste a global. And, if you do that enough, you can put yourself in a position where the pull was salvageable, and now it's not because you just have no mana, right? Because you wasted all of your mana on globals that don't matter. So you have to be really choosy on some of these globals. Like, there's tons of debuffs in this game it's like minus 50 strength, and even if that's on a warrior or something, it doesn't matter, right? It's not relevant when your group is dying. That's not the type of debuff that you need to be removing. You need to be healing, and you need to be healing the right person, not dispelling in those situations. Of course, sometimes there's situations where a target will get slept for 18 seconds and they don't have a way to escape it. And in that case, it's like, do you want your DPS to be out of the fight for 18 seconds in a pull where you really need them? Of course not, right? So you probably have to dispel that sleep. So it just depends. It's like highly situational, but it's something you should be keeping in mind. You only want to dispel when it matters. And I think the final tip I have for you in those group scenarios where everything is kind of hitting the fan is don't be afraid to use the inefficient spells, right? We already kind of talked about it a little bit at the start of the section, but basically you're probably going to have to dump shields, you're going to have to dump flash heals, and you can worry about how are we going to scale back all the mana we're burning through deeper into the pull, but at the start, you really just have to make sure you keep people alive, because again, you have to keep them alive for as large a percentage of the pull as you can, because if you let them die at the very beginning, now you don't have their damage for like the entire pull, right? So don't be afraid to use things like flash heal, shield, right? And make sure you're using those spells and you're not trying to cheat too hard early and use the mana efficient spells like the normal heals, like the renews. If you notice in that clip that I did, the hardcore review clip of like the first one I did, that was the downfall there, right? The priest put a renew on that mage, and if they just would have flash healed him or shielded him, he lives, right? But because we tried to play it in a bit more mana efficient manner, you pay the price for it, right? So always make sure that when the situation is dire and people really need those spells, they're getting them. Don't be too conservative. You can only worry about the later half of the pull if you get there, right? If you don't get there, then it's all for naught, okay? And I know I said that was the final tip, but we actually have one more for you. And this kind of seems like it's going to be in contradiction to the one I just said, but it's not really a full-on contradiction. But while you need to be healing aggressively at the start of those pulls when things go south, you also do have to be mindful of your positioning and how mobs could kind of rip off and come to you, right? Because in a lot of cases when things get overpulled, especially, the tank does not have threat on the new mobs, or other DPS don't really have threat on the new mobs, right? Because they're new mobs. They just came into the group. So any amount of healing you're doing is going to rip off, okay? Which means that the mobs are probably going to come right over to you, and they're going to start harassing you. And if it's enough of them, right, then that can be a real big problem. There's actually going to be a clip that I'm going to review probably in a couple days where it's like a Scarlet Monastery group, and there's a big overpull, basically, right? And the priest is actually a newer priest, but he does an excellent job of not like panic overreacting and spam healing the tank too much at the very start of the pull. Like, he lets the mobs at least get into like the melee range, right? And then what happens is he starts healing the tank, and the tank got a little low, right? So it was kind of a scary situation. But if he would have healed like sooner, even like a second sooner, all those mobs would have immediately run to him, and it would have been very difficult for the tank and other members of the group to kind of like peel them off the priest. They probably just would have ran on him, even if he would have faded, which obviously you should do in this scenario, but I think even if he would have faded, it wouldn't have been enough. They would have just ran up and one-shot him. So there are some situations, especially on big overpulls, where you may need to let the DPS kind of like take some of the hits in the aggro first, and then start pumping out the heals. And you just kind of have to hope that they can deal with it, because there'll be some situations where if you heal at the start, you'll just get dogpiled on and instantly killed, even with a fade, right? So it is something to be aware of. And in those situations, also, shield can sometimes be better than heals, because it tends to produce less aggro, from my experience, right? But keep in mind, if you do shield somebody, and the mobs haven't hit anybody yet, or they don't have threat on anybody else, they will still rip to you, right? So it's not like it doesn't cause any aggro or anything. It's just maybe a lesser form of aggro. So you do still have to be careful. Yeah, definitely keep that in mind. And your positioning is usually something that's not super thought about in dungeons or these 5-man scenarios, but it can be very important. And a lot of times, obviously, you want to be playing somewhat behind your melee, right, with your other ranged, but it does help to at least be grouped with your other range, like to play near your mage, right, or to play, and how I like to do it is I like to play kind of directly behind my warrior when I can. And there's a couple reasons for this, right? Like, if you're really lazy with your positioning and you're off in the middle of nowhere, what can happen is in those situations where extra things do get pulled, and you're forced to put those heals out to save people at the start of the pull. Now when things snap onto you, it's harder for people to react, right? Because if you're behind the tank, the mob's kind of going to be running right through him, so he can just turn around, snap aggro, and get the mob, get it corralled, right? But if you're in some weird ass position and all of a sudden you heal, this mob just, maybe it starts it's like running towards the tank, obviously, and then you're like off to the side for some reason, and you cast a heal on the tank, Now that mob hasn't even gotten to the tank and it starts running to you from the side, right? Whereas if you were behind the tank, the mob would still have to be running towards him. It would still have to run through, right? So you can use your positioning to kind of mitigate some of these issues as well. And positioning near CC classes like mages can really help, because even if you can't, for whatever reason, be perfectly in line with your tank, at least if you're near your mage, now the mage can peel off of you, right? They can Nova the mobs or something like that. But if you're just in your own world somewhere and mobs start running onto you, now you're kind of, you're screwed. You basically have to run to your tank, or you have to run to your mage, and that's something that I want to highlight to you guys too, is like, if you do get caught in those scenarios where you're kind of in a bad position, you have to get back to somebody who can do something for you. It can be your mage, right? Potentially, it can be your tank. You just have to get back to somebody. Somebody's going to help you in some way, because you don't want to be just sitting there tanking mobs on your own. You're really squishy, even with inner fire up sometimes, and casting pushback is not so great. And that leads me to my final point. This isn't really a talent build or a talent video. We have a couple talent videos for rating, and basically both specs would work. Any spec you choose, whether it be the Power Infusion spec or the Holy spec, they both work for dungeons just fine. The Holy spec is obviously just a bit better for dungeons because you get spiritual healing, you get spiritual guidance, which gives you a lot more plus healing, which makes spells like your normal base heals, which you use a lot, as well as your renews, more effective, right? Because those spells scale really well off plus healing, and you get more of it with spiritual guidance. But the main thing you want to have is that you really want to have healing focus. If you're healing dungeons, absolutely make sure you have this, because you are going to get threat at certain points, even if you're using Fade properly. And not having this and having this, it's the difference in the world. This is actually one of the reasons why I don't like healing low-level dungeons as non-holy, to be honest. And typically, if I'm going to be like doing any significant amount of dungeons at all while I'm leveling, I will switch to Holy Spec at level 39, and I will do the Holy Spec for questing and leveling. And that way, if I want to do dungeons, I can do them easily because of this talent right here. This healing focus talent is so broken, especially if you're dealing with like newer tanks who don't really know how to play the game that well. It's going to be a complete lifesaver, because you're going to spend a lot of your low-level dungeon time with mobs on you. And if there's overpulls that happen, mobs are definitely going to be on you. And this is the difference between life and death, especially in like a hardcore scenario where you're healing. You absolutely need this talent. This talent is also good to have as well. I would have at least a point in this, depending on how I'm building, even if I'm doing a normal discipline leveling build. But, and obviously it kind of stinks that they have to crit you to proc it, but it's, just another lifesaver. I don't have it talented here because this is a pure raid spec. But, yeah, I just wanted to point out those two things, that healing focus is insane in dungeons, and you should always have it when dungeoning when possible. You might not be able to have this if you're doing your normal discipline spec and you're like level 20 to 30, right? So in those situations, it's just there's nothing you can do. But once you get to a level where you can go Holy Spec, if you're going to be doing any amount of dungeons on a regular basis, I would suggest going the Holy DPS spec and picking this up, because it's just super valuable, and always have this late game when you're doing dungeons. Absolutely. And yeah, that's pretty much it. I think this was a long one, but us, we like to be comprehensive and long-winded. So there it is. Hopefully this guide helped you. Like, comment, and subscribe, obviously, if you enjoyed it. Feel free to leave any feedback in the comments, and I will talk to you guys next time.